Isaac Sarason is a skilled hacker, formerly employed by British Telecom-Sprint. When his health failed, Isaac did the only thing he could think of. He ran. A burqa-wearing doctor known as Fatima took pity on Isaac and helped him make his way to the mysterious Star X line. At the end of all hope, they found the Star X line and the slim promise that the enigmatic beings behind the Star X could save Isaac from the implants which destroyed his life. What do you do when those who saved you have recorded everything you are? What do you do when your every action is tracked by the Keylogger? Colbyjack.net is proud to present Firmware Keylogger, the third installment of Firmware by Colbytrax. Episode 39. I heard your hand strike against the metal cabinet. The resonance was such that I knew it was a metal computer case. There was only one box such as that in the room, the Adelphi terminal. I terminated my connections to each of the devices I controlled in the room. I withdrew into the Apamapo null. I shut down my Wi-Fi transmitter and waited to see what Irrgarten had planned. I didn't expect there to be any trauma from losing a network-connected system, but if this Irrgarten had truly spent the last several days tormenting versions of me, I felt it would be prudent to not take any risks. Better safe than sorry. I heard a scrambling sound come from Irrgarten. There was a series of popping sounds, which could only have been pre-loosened cases jettisoning their batteries. While no one that mattered made devices which allowed for the removal of batteries by the consumer, it also wasn't any great feat of soldering to change the connections so the batteries could be removed. I didn't bother turning the Wi-Fi radio back on. I knew there was no active computers available within the severely reduced Apamapo null's range. I saw a hand cover the camera on the Apamapo null and heard the plastic snap of an aftermarket switch being thrown. Then another. The Wi-Fi radio was no longer one of the assets I could count on. That had been the first switch. I was also blind now. With the tripping of the second switch, I lost all access to the Apamapo null's camera. Irrgarten left the microphones and speakers on the Apamapo null active. I could hear, and I could speak. Other than that, there was nothing I could do. I had to get a handle on what she knew, so I knew what I had meant by telling me Xi was Abedini, and I was to run with it. Had I had a plan? Did I know how seriously Xi was into conspiracies? She wasn't happy to be the weirdo in the wilderness telling the truth about who really controls the world. No, Xi definitely was anything but a passive observer of the conspiracies of our time. Xi was part of a conspiracy herself. I might not know what was happening, but I did know one thing. I knew that information was power, and from the state of the Apamapo null I was on, I knew she hadn't been as ready for me as Xi acted. Xi had put me on a computer which also held an archive of everything Xi had ever worked on. There were manuscripts for books in various stages of completion. There was an immense store of failed AIs and documentations on tens of thousands of patents which had been allowed to fade from public knowledge. This wasn't a cage built to contain an evil Jinn. This was the only machine available which had been modified according to the strange control fetish Irrgarten appeared to have for technology. It had been several minutes, and Irrgarten had remained silent. I heard a rhythmic tapping which suggested someone texting on a cheap burn phone. A burn phone is a cheap phone sold next to the candy and bodegas across the city. There were no contracts. Airtime was paid for through anonymous cards. There was no accountability. Anyone could buy one. Activate it with a prepaid airtime card and use it without any trace of who bought it. This was especially true if the purchaser used cash for all the purchases. These were the phones scriptwriters turned to on every television program the minute they wanted a character to make a call without being tracked. The truth I learned at BTS was that they weren't as anonymous as everyone wanted to believe. Though to overcome their basic level of anonymity took a level of access to telecom databases that only a government, or for that matter a city-controlling AI, would be able to muster. Irrgarten made a sound of satisfaction which sounded more twisted and sexual than I am sure Xi intended, thanks to the focal distorter Xi seemed intent on using. Xi wasn't as smart as she wanted me to believe. I don't think she had been in her office since my download started. From the logging information on the Apamapo, the download for me had started on Saturday shortly after noon and ended 2 hours later. The download of the massive data archive I had with me hadn't ended until a few minutes before noon on Monday. It had ended only minutes before I woke in lovely Casa Opemapo Null. Okay, now that didn't make sense. If I had been under assault by StarX back at BGM, how had I found over 2 days' worth of time to transfer a file? I checked the log file for myself in the archive. Both downloads had initiated at the same time from a cloud storage facility out of Switzerland. That figures. I didn't have time to transfer to someone with less than backbone-level connection, so I sent myself and the archive to the gnomes of Zurich, and then sent a link to Eargarden so G could start the transfer at your convenience. The one nice thing about the gnomes was their use of encryption at every point in the chain of responsibility. They encrypted the VPN connecting the user to their archive. They encode the data on their server's data stores. Finally, they pushed the data out using yet another layer of encryption. It was all a wonderful system. The only place the data wasn't encrypted was on the sender's and receiver's side. Then I realized it. Eargarden didn't know what was in the archive. She didn't know it wasn't encoded. Now, that was something I could do something about. While I didn't have the computing power necessary to open the archive which shared the Opemapo Null with me, I had more than enough processing power to pass the entire compressed archive through an encrypted routine. The routine didn't have to be complex. I doubted Eargarden had the system resources available to crack commercial-grade encryption, but it did have to be easy to implement. I settled on using 3 different encryption schemes, one over the other, each with separate key phrases. I knew I couldn't store the keys locally, and had no doubt Eargarden would read my memory matrix. So I went for 3 phrases I knew were all over my memories. The which order with which encryption scheme was something which would only make sense to me. That is the problem when you're trying to create a passphrase you need to forget and remember at the same time. I finished the encryption and then overwrote the space in my memory containing the phrases until I was sure no one could recover them. Tasks like this don't take very long when you're using algorithms designed for mega-scale systems on a petascale computer. I was going to try to get Eargarden to tell me more about my brothers when the world changed. The world really didn't change, just the way the air handled echoes did. There was a moment of discontinuity, and I found I could hear 5 different breathing sounds. "It's back on," I heard Eargarden say. "Watch what you say. It lives up to its name." "Didn't you mean G's back on?" I teased. Eargarden inhaled sharply, as if I'd found a sticking point on her moral compass. "I meant it. G is reserved for those who are born, not a thing which is made." Oh, I think I had it now. The run with it message, the crack in Eargarden's armor, was your blindness to the core aposty of your religion. The Abedini weren't reviled by every other Muslim sect in the world because they accepted every freaky creep in the world and their strange sexual proclivities. They were named apostates because they believed there would be another prophet. A capital P prophet who would bring forth the next series of messages from Allah. A prophet that was also an AI. I don't think Eargarden really wanted that. I was beginning to get the idea that Eargarden liked being an Abedini because it was a license to be a freak in public. Basically, no other religion would accept Jur as she was. "Oh, Janan, that hurts," I answered. "Since you have my head in a figurative bag, I am assuming that this is a secret meeting of the We Hate Koenig Club." At the name Koenig, a voice like a mouse on helium blurted out, "There is a Koenig? Really?" "Don't listen to it," snapped Eargarden. "Remember what I said about it being a devious daemon. It can't be trusted. Ever." She put a lot of emphasis on that ever. So much emphasis it split into 2 separate words. "But Janan," a man's voice with hints of a North Shore accent interrupted, "I think Penny has a right to ask the questions. We only recently learned that the beast at the center of the city was an AI, and not just a conspiracy of capitalists. Now we learn it is named after the family line of the mayor. That is just so amazing." "What were you rebelling against if you didn't know it was an AI?" I asked, trying to learn as much as possible at this meeting of freaks I was obviously the main attraction at.
Muncie thought it was the Illuminati.
Penny snapped back.
It made sense. They had ties throughout all of the largest corporations and were capable of stopping the development of technologies which would adversely affect their control over the global gestalt.
You're just parroting back the crap Eargarden keeps babbling on about. A new voice entered the fray. It was a woman's voice, which sounded like someone who had spent their childhood gargling gravel. Besides, Muncie's Bavarian Illuminati theories were at least interesting after a couple joints. Hell, the gnomes of Zurich actually exist, and don't answer to anyone. My God, Desiree, you are a crotch with ears. The gnomes of Zurich is a freaking data storage company. They have as much to do with the Illuminati as you do with celibacy. The fifth voice finally made its presence known and proved to be the least interesting of the voices present, and the most normal. Chris, you know how I feel about insults based around sexual characteristics. Eargarden snapped. That coming from the last person to sleep with Desiree, Chris responded. Hey, Desiree, is the prof an innie or an outie? You don't have to answer that. Eargarden hissed in the direction of Desiree.
She better,
Penny responded, with another screech of helium-powered vocal cords.
We got a pool going, and we need a winner. Hey, Muncie, what's the pool up to?
Muncie slipped into a mockery of a sports announcer's voice. The lucky individual who correctly identifies the gender of one Professor Jinan Irgarten will be entered into a drawing to win the grand prize of 350 jewels. Irgarten's voice broke in over Muncie's. So you each paid in 87.5 jewels to bet on my gender? No, why would we do that? Desiree asked. That's such a goofy number. Where'd you get it from anyway? Eargarden was getting more disturbed with each passing moment. You are an example of a wasted education, Desiree. There are 4 of you. 350 divided by 4 is 87.5. That's not nice, Desiree whined past the throat covered in sand. Really, Doc, that was uncalled for, Chris answered. I mean, just because Desiree might hold the record for the most men ambushed and ravished on campus is no reason to say her education is wasted. Really, think of the damage she'd be doing if we let her loose on the city streets. What's that supposed to mean? Desiree asked. I could hear a dump truck worth of gravel, trying to decide what to do about this latest insult. What it means, dear, and I know this from experience, remember? Muncie said. I heard an uh-huh come out of Desiree's sandy throat. You have a lot of problems with the idea of no. I think this would have continued for hours, but Penny chose this moment to interrupt with a burst of helium cheerfulness.
Sorry, Doc. We only paid 10 jewels apiece to take our chances. Before you go off all crazy, the rest of the money comes from tickets we sold to your students. It was actually harder to sell tickets than I expected. I think it had more to do with the seeming binary choice and the need for a raffle to decide the winner. So before we start another insult session, could Desiree please tell us what kind of equipment Professor Eargarden is hiding beneath your clothes?
I heard Desiree cough out an answer which no one could hear, and then with much prodding she spit out, both, as if it were a piece of stone stuck in her teeth. The room erupted in groans and what the hells, and finally resolved in the sound of Penny screeching over and over again the words, I knew it! I knew it! I knew it! What do I get? What? Muncie, tell me what I get! Who else said both? There was a rustle of plastic and cloth as Muncie checked his device. They must have a network signal here. Interesting. There was a gurgle as Muncie suddenly realized something important, and then he announced in his sports announcer voice, Penny, you are the only one to list both as the gender of Professor Eargarten. That entitles you to the entire 350 jewels without the need for a drawing. Let's have a round of applause for our grand prize winner, Penny! There was a round of weak applause, followed by the cries of, I don't believe it! And shortly after by, Keep your hands to yourself! I waited for a break in the cacophony before I spoke. This is not how I expected a conspiracy against the power of darkness which controls our city to behave. This is very disappointing. I don't know if it's even worth my time to talk to you. I heard a puff of air escape from Desiree and her complain in a gruff voice, "Great! I wasted an entire weekend hauling crap around the city, and now he doesn't want to deal with us. This sucks!"
"Hey, Desiree," Chris called.
"What?"
Desiree answered. "At least you didn't have a chance to get another sexual assault accusation. There is that,"
Chris taunted. I heard a shuffle of bodies and feet as Penny and Muncie struggled to keep Desiree off Chris. This was the most fun I'd had since waking up in that godforsaken office.
"What has gotten into you?"
Professor Eargarden barked. I heard a shuffle and a hand slapped hard against the case of the Epimaponol. Everything became silence. Firmware Keylogger is the third book in the firmware pentology. That's 5 books, if you must know. It begins where Firmware Proxy ends, which in turn followed on the heels of Firmware Hijacked. So you haven't heard or read Firmware Hijacked or Proxy, this would be a great time to head on over to Colbyjack.net and either download the podcast on the audio side, read the episodes on the visual side, or download the Colbyjack Sunday Reader issues 1 through 46 in your choice of either EPUB or Mobi. Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and Keylogger are all available in ebook versions from our store at shop.colbyjack.net, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and Smashwords.com. Just search for Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. I'm the only one. A complete audiobook version of both Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and soon Keylogger is available for download through our shop as well. If you don't need any stuff, but would like to support our work, drop on by Colbyjack.net and hit the pretty little donate button conveniently located on the right-hand side of the blog roll. If you're on a smaller screen, the bottom will be found at the bottom of the page. Firmware Keylogger is released under a Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, share-alike license. Do what you want with it. Just don't sell it, and always tell people where it came from. If you received this from a friend and want more information about Colbyjack.net and our split personality website, just drop on over to Colbyjack.net and select either the audio or visual side. The audio side carries our podcast, while the visual side carries our writings. Whichever side catches your fancy is fine with us. We're of two minds about the whole thing anyway. I do mostly Twitter, so if you do the tweets and want to follow me, I'm Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. Thank you once again. Remember to be fabulous and have a wonderful week.